Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fireside chat with Dr. Michael Rosenblatt. My name is Xiaohua Yang, and I'm the director of University of San Francisco School Management China Business Studies Initiative, CBSI, and professor of international business. 14 months ago today, the first city in China was locked down. During the last 14 months, the world has experienced many sufferings and devastating losses from COVID-19. So far, we have lost nearly 3 million people. The US alone lost over 500,000 people. The economies in many countries have been on the brink of collapsing. Global trade investment almost came to a halt. However, we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, thanks to the perseverance of men and women around the world to fight this invisible war against humanity. In particular, the medical scientists who have worked day and night to develop the vaccines to fight against the virus. Today, we are privileged to invite one of the world's leading medical scientists who was involved in developing the Moderna vaccine. I am among the fortunate ones to have had my first shot of the Moderna vaccine. CBSI is a San Francisco, Silicon Valley-based thought leader, knowledge hub, and a relationship builder for the US business and its connection with China, Asia, and the rest of the world. We are the only research center at the University of San Francisco focusing on international business, leveraging 500 years of Jesuit tradition of linking global education and commerce and historical tie to China. We regularly produce public events like this and host international conferences. We do cutting-edge research and disseminate among policymakers and business communities. Our hallmark International Business Ambassador Program has produced some very successful business leaders. CBSI started the first event in Saving Lives and Livelihoods series on the impact of COVID-19 on the people and economy on April 15th, 2020. We are proud to present today's event to you. And I want to thank Professor Tatoul Manasserian's effort in making today's event possible. And especially to thank Professor Rosenblatt for coming to our platform to share his insights about vaccine and the impact of the vaccine on our lives and livelihoods. And I want to thank today's co-sponsor, the NPA Health Services Administration program at the University of San Francisco School of Management. May I invite the director of the program, Professor Vipul Vyas, to say a few words to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I head up the health concentration within the Master's of Public Administration program within our School of Management here at the University of San Francisco. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Dr. Rosenblatt is going to cover. I have focused in the last several months around vaccine hesitancy specifically, and it's wonderful to see the amazing moonshot work that folks like Moderna have done, and now see that take society towards herd immunity, where we can return to some degree of normalcy. And I've been working and speaking with a lot of the frontline workers who are administering the vaccine, dealing with some of the folks that are excited about getting the vaccine, and also some of the folks who are skeptical or mistrustful, which we have to just work through as a society, bring people confidence, get them in a place where they feel this is something that they want to take part in, so that we can all collectively reopen our economies and return to normal. So again, I've had my first shot of the Moderna vaccine this weekend. Everything went fine. I'm looking forward to my second shot, which will enable me to have even more independence as the days and weeks go by. And so with that, I'm just really pleased to get the chance to hear from one of the people making a change in life possible.
I'll turn over to Professor Tatoul Manasserian to introduce our distinguished speaker today.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Professor Xiaohua Yang for many years of our joint work. It's a pleasure to be today as well with Professor Yang to arrange this worldwide event, a fireside meeting with Professor Mike Rosenblatt. And I would like to extend our greetings to our colleagues and friends and students particularly. We now co-teach with Professor Yang the international business at the University of San Francisco. And we were thinking in the beginning about the impact of COVID-19 on international business. And this is an opportunity, a fantastic opportunity for all of us to hear from the source, from the very source, how it happened, the invention of the Moderna vaccine. And it's an extreme privilege for me now to introduce Dr. Michael Rosenblatt, who is a Flagship Pioneering senior partner. And prior to this position, he was Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer of Merck from 2009 to 2016. And during his career, he was held appointments as Dean of Tufts University School of Medicine, Robert Professor of Molecular Medicine, and George Minot Professor of Medicine, both at Harvard Medical School. President, Harvard Faculty Dean, and Senior Vice President for Academic Programs of Beth Israel Diagnosis Medical Center, and Director of the Harvard MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology. Moreover, Michael Rosenblatt is the holder of 19 patents and is author of or co-author of over 180 peer-reviewed papers and commentaries. Professor Rosenblatt is the recipient of the Fuller Albright Award for his work on parathyroid hormone, the Vincent to Wingard Award in peptide chemistry and biology, and the Chairman's Award from Merck. Again, it's an honor and privilege to have you, Professor Rosenblatt, and the floor is yours.
It's an honor for me and a real opportunity to be with all of you. So I thank you for the invitation and send my greetings to the audience. And what would you like me to start with? What do you think would be of most interest to our audience?
Dr. Rosenblatt, I think it will be extremely interesting for all of us to learn how you came up with the idea and how the vaccine was invented, and what will be your view about the impact, the possible impact of the vaccine on our lives, and particularly on business and international business.
First, let me make clear, I'm a member of the Moderna team. I'm not actually an employee or in the staff of Moderna, but I've been consulting in various capacities for the last several years and became even more involved as this coronavirus made its appearance on the scene. So Moderna has been a pioneer in developing messenger RNA technology. And this is a platform which, by the way, is characteristic of the kinds of companies that the firm I'm at, Flagship Pioneering, starts. These are technologies that have the ability to go into more than one therapeutic area, more than one therapeutic application. So we don't start cancer companies or inflammation companies. We tend to start companies that have a technology that can go into several areas of medical need. And Moderna and the really terrific team there has been working for a decade to take an idea that had been started in academia in general, which are how could you take this code, this blueprint, messenger RNA, which is used throughout the systems of the human beings to make generally protein products. And so they had ideas about vaccines. They also had ideas about making proteins that would be therapeutically useful. One thing that is not spoken about very often, but is absolutely essential to the success of this vaccine and other vaccines that they're working on, is that messenger RNA alone is degraded very quickly when it's in the blood circulation, and it also can be quite inflammatory. So finding a way to package it, to put it in little bubbles where it could travel to the body and then get inside cells was absolutely essential. And that's a whole system that was developed by Moderna using particles that have a lot of lipid, a lot of fat in them to carry inside them messenger RNA. And the system, the platform that they were developing is one in which the information, the code, the blueprint is inside these bubbles, if you will. This bubble encounters a cell, generally a muscle cell, and then it delivers inside the messenger RNA into the cell. And when the cell sees this messenger RNA, it starts making copies of a protein. For the coronavirus, that's the spike protein. So unlike conventional vaccines, in which what's generally administered is the protein itself, the spike protein, or a virus other than the coronavirus is used to carry code for the spike protein inside a cell. This has no virus. It doesn't have protein. Instead, the messenger RNA gets inside the cell and it starts pumping out spike protein. And this goes on for 2 to 4 weeks. That turns out, although it was not known at the beginning, that turns out to be a very effective way to present spike protein to the body. And the immune response, as we know, as we've come to learn, is very robust, so that we have efficacy of 94, 95% for the mRNA vaccines. And it works very well even in the elderly, which not all vaccines do. And the safety record is really terrific. So that's kind of the story of how the vaccine was invented. And then there are a whole set of challenges related to demonstrating how well the vaccine works in a way that will convince regulatory authorities and will convince doctors, and in this case, very importantly, the population. So in record time, we went from the sequence of the virus to completion of a large 30,000 patient clinical trial. And I remember in January, we knew in the US by December that there was a dangerous virus brewing in China. And by January, Chinese scientists had sequenced the genetic code of the vaccine. And I remember speaking to my colleagues at Moderna in early January and saying, it's sort of ironic to look back now and say, well, I don't know how important this virus is going to be. I don't know what kind of impact it's going to be, but this technology that you have might be very effective for this new virus, never seen before in human beings. And the answer I got was very encouraging, which is, oh, we've been working on it since the day the sequence came out. And indeed, vaccine was made in about 42 days and administered to humans in 60 some odd days. So the pace was extraordinarily fast. A clinical trial was designed, as I mentioned, for 30,000 patients to demonstrate protection against the clinical disease, documented COVID. You know, the results were, I have to say, as good as any vaccine I've ever seen, both in terms of efficacy and safety. No patient who has received vaccine has died of COVID. Hospitalization rates are way down, and everyone is shifted, even if you're one of the unusual cases to actually get COVID after being vaccinated. The severity of the disease moves down in a stepwise fashion. Less hospitalization, less severe disease moves to moderate. I'm speaking in general terms, moderate to mild, et cetera. So these are kind of dreamlike vaccines. And we can get into this later, but this platform can be applied potentially much more widely than only coronavirus and COVID.
Thank you, Professor Rosenblatt. Of course, we have a number of questions, and I would like to see if there are any comments. But before going any further, if you don't mind, I would like to ask a question that was raised from the audience. How do you think the rapidness of this vaccine will change the future pace of medicine creation?
Yeah. Well, the speed of this vaccine is unprecedented. About the fastest vaccines get developed is about 4 years. So that this is just torn up the roadway in terms of speed. And let me begin by saying, because that's been such a focus of attention, that corners were not cut. So for the sake of speed, still safety was examined very carefully by an independent review board. There was collaboration and input from the federal government, from the NIH, very involved in the design of the studies, input from the CDC, from the FDA, from BARDA, which is a government agency. All of them had input into this, a very effective collaboration. And I can say that despite the speed, there are no issues. What we don't know, and which of course it's impossible to know, is what might be presumably rare long-term side effects. Nobody can produce 2-year data for a vaccine that's only been around for months. So we will know that. There's careful monitoring going on. Vaccine's been administered to millions of people, but that's one that you just can't make time go faster. I think in terms of what we've learned for development, remember these vaccines have been approved under a technical category called emergency use authorization. So they don't yet technically have full approval. And we've learned that if studies are done well, and there's integrity to the data, you can move very quickly when circumstances compel us to. So let me be a little clearer about that. The general FDA approval process is that a drug or vaccine needs to be demonstrated to be safe and to be effective. That lens looks only at the vaccine or the drug in isolation. Is it safe? Is it effective? The circumstances under which these vaccines have been approved includes that, importantly includes that, but it takes a view of the context that we're operating in. So I would say that it's much more a risk analysis than exclusively a safe and effective. Namely, what's the risk of not being vaccinated? What are the possible consequences of getting COVID, your probability and the resulting complications versus the risk of the vaccine? So that becomes a very important part of the analysis, not ordinarily applied in that way to drug approval. So we've learned that that's something that can be done. We've learned a lot about cooperation between these sectors that I've said, collaboration. I think those are the main things that we've learned about the speed. And I guess importantly, just to reemphasize that you can be quick without compromising the quality of the product that you have at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt. Other question that is raised, I would like to forward it to you, is what will Moderna need to continue doing once the current pandemic is over?
Let's hope that time comes very soon. But as I told you, the idea behind Moderna, when they were formed, they never imagined that this is what they would work on. And very much to their credit, I believe, is that they mounted a huge effort and in many ways redirected the workforce, the scientists, the manufacturing people, basically all parts of the company because of this urgent humanitarian need. And so they put at risk, both in terms of effort, and by that I mean an opportunity risk. They worked on this, which is very high risk, as opposed to something else that might have been more surefire that they could have worked on. Remember, not every vaccine effort succeeds. We've been working, people have been working on an AIDS vaccine for over 30 years now, and we still don't actually have one. So they put that at risk. They put capital at risk, both in terms of R&D and manufacturing. So they basically redirected things and fortunately have had a success. But their original idea was not one product. Their original idea, as I spoke about, was a platform. And now they can expand that and work on that. And they can look at other vaccines. My own prejudice is that this platform has the potential to revolutionize the way we think about vaccines. We can make vaccines for infectious diseases, potentially, that we didn't think were possible before. We can revisit older vaccines and see if we can make better forms of them. We can make vaccines for non-infectious diseases like cancer, and we can make highly personal vaccines, a vaccine for, let's say, a single person who has a single cancer. So there's huge possibilities just within the domain of vaccines. And then there are therapeutics, proteins, so-called biologicals that can be made, and other products. So they will now, with all that they've learned and all that they've developed in this massive effort for the coronavirus vaccine, is that they will be able to spread out and try to take advantage of the platform in several different areas simultaneously. And I think we'll be learning a lot about where this technology can go and perhaps where it can't go for drug development, a fairly short time frame.
What you say enriches our knowledge about the vaccine, and as I understood it clearly, there is a possibility also to customize for people, for individuals, not only for diseases to categorize, but also for single person, for someone who have particular needs. And let me ask another question that comes from the audience. Why have we not seen more Moderna-based vaccine prior to COVID? It seems to be more effective in producing a response, fast to produce and easy to scale. It would seem that it would have already taken off for the flu or other diseases. Partially you covered, but still.
This is a brand new technology. It would be, like asking why didn't we have nuclear power in 1920 instead of 19. That's when the science was able to be. The insights came, and we're able to work on the science, and it moved extraordinarily quickly. I don't think we can answer why it didn't come early, but I do think, as I said, that we're going to see this fan out. I think in many ways it's going to revolutionize parts of medicine, particularly vaccines. And
there is another question. Will this technology be able to be used for other viral hepatitis or bacterial infections?
I think it's got the possibility for other viral infections, perhaps for bacterial infections. I think we don't know yet. This is really pioneering. This is a frontier. And when you have a new technology for the first time, you can't predict, even the people closest to it can't predict everywhere that it will go. It undoubtedly won't be able to go everywhere. There will be some failures, but now today there's a lot of room for optimism. I would say not only to get vaccines, but therapeutic vaccines, not just to prevent diseases, but things that could potentially treat diseases. And as I said, moving away not only from infection, but to other kinds of diseases like cancers.
I agree, and let's hope that it will work further, and let's keep optimistic. Once a booster for a particular vaccine is available, can it be used effectively as a booster for another pharma company's vaccine? And can boosters be compatible with other vaccines with similar technology?
Yeah. So one of the really nice things about this technology is that you can very rapidly make something, just as we talked about making something personalized for a person for a particular kind of cancer. We can use this technology to make vaccines or boosters for the different strains and variants, the mutations that the virus generates, and we're hearing about these, the UK strain, the South African, the Brazilian, and probably the United States has some cooking that we just haven't sequenced yet. So because these vaccines work right off the genetic code, once you get a new variant, you can sequence it, get the code, and you can make a specialized booster. That booster probably will not have to go through the same kind of testing because it's just a variation on a theme. And by the way, we have plenty of laboratory tests, so-called in vitro and animal tests. So the boosters can be put on top of any previous vaccine, you could use a booster. Let's say, I'm making this up, but you could use a booster, let's say, for the South African strain, if it were needed, from Moderna on top, certainly on top of Pfizer, on top of Johnson & Johnson, et cetera. So they can travel well. They potentially could be used in combination with flu or sometime after a flu vaccine. They can be applied kind of universally, and they can travel well into different areas where there's specialized need.
The audience is very much interested, and we're getting more and more questions. I want to ask if Professor Young something to add or have any question?
Yes, Professor Rosenblatt, thank you so much for sharing with us all the insights and some of the very technical, aspects of developing the vaccine. I think we learned a lot. But next, actually, there are sets of questions which are actually related to more of social, psychological, maybe economic issue related areas. So let me start with a couple of questions here. Some actually still is, even personally, I deal with young people since I'm a professor and dealing with young people all the time. Like today, many of the attendees are actually our students, and they're young, and I have young kids at home as well. There's general actually perception among young people that they have some skepticism about the vaccine. It doesn't matter whether it's Moderna or some others. They have been waiting, actually, not take it, and they want to wait till some of them said they may never want to take the vaccine. So what do you do to dispel this kind of skepticism among the young people who think they are probably pretty strong, not easily get affected, or if they do, they can recover quickly. But we know it's still, it's an issue, it's a problem, it's a very risky thing, to do, right? Not to take a vaccine. So what would you say to the young people?
Well, I would say several. First of all, you're describing a very real situation. And I would say several things to those people who are hesitant in that way. First of all, transparency is extremely important. The results of these clinical trials and now the monitoring that is going on, there's tremendous amount of information about the safety of these vaccines. These are, to my mind, the best vaccines in the history of humankind. They're extremely effective and they are extremely safe. And we know that. So those who are saying, well, let me see how other people do before I go get vaccinated. What are you waiting for? Is 50 million not enough? Do you need 100 million? How many people do you need vaccinated until you feel safe? Secondly, you may think that you're invulnerable or that it's a statistical game, but I've now seen younger people who've gotten the disease. And they haven't had to go onto a ventilator. They didn't die, but 20% of them approximately get this so-called long haul syndrome, the long haulers. This is life-changing. This is a disease you don't want to get. I have a neighbor where I live, a young man, and who was in great shape, really tremendously fit, working out, worked on construction. He can't climb a flight of stairs now. It's been 3 months since he had COVID. We don't know if he's going to get better. So you're playing roulette. And then the last thing I would say is to appeal to people's sense of responsibility for the community, for their relatives, and for the general community. Yes, they may not get a serious form of the disease, but they could bring that disease to grandma or grandpa, or they could bring it out at a time when we are racing to get so many people vaccinated, because there's a dynamic that occurs as we get more and more people vaccinated and we approach herd immunity. This puts pressure on the virus, whose whole job is to multiply. And it has less opportunities to multiply. So we select, at that moment, ironically, we begin to select for the most highly transmissible, the most contagious form of the disease. So we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible to get to herd immunity as quickly as possible. And that requires the participation of young people. If they sit it out, it's quite possible that other strains will emerge and that we will be living with this or chasing this virus and its mutations around for a long time. So I would say there's some social responsibility involved here as well.
Thank you. I hope more young people can hear your voice. So the next question I would like to ask on behalf of the audience is, how do you assess the efficacy of the virus for different ethnic groups? Are there any types of vaccine better for one ethnic group than the others?
So one thing that the big trials, the Moderna trial and the Pfizer trial and the trials of the others were that they did was to make sure that they had a reasonable number of people from diverse backgrounds in the clinical trial. And you can imagine with vaccine hesitancy in some areas, if you didn't have data that you could present that showed that the vaccine works to people with different racial or ethnic backgrounds, that could be an issue in terms of its credibility. So I know the data for the Moderna clinical trial well. There were 3,000 African Americans out of the 30,000. There were Latinx, there were 6,000 people participating in the trial of that. And from everything we've seen, the vaccine works equally well regardless of racial background. One of the not necessarily expected outcomes, but a very happy one, is that, by the way, that it works in the elderly just as well as it works in everyone else. And for many vaccines, that's not true, that the immune response of the elderly is not as robust. Now, is one vaccine better than the other in certain groups? I think that that's more a question of of work that people do and the environment they're in. So people who cannot take any time off from work, where it's very difficult, who you would be asking to come twice for a vaccine, when it's a real hardship for them to take any time off, I think in those cases, a single vaccine will be better, because that's better than inadequate coverage. And so, people who are, people who are in situations where they may be exposed or where it's very difficult for them to either come for a second dose, or they may not be willing to come for a second dose, they might come for one dose, then I think there are advantages like that. But, basically my recommendation on this is, if you have an opportunity to get the vaccine, get it. It doesn't matter which of the emergency approved vaccines you get. They all will prevent death. They all dramatically reduce hospitalization. They all work very well. We can get into finer points, but the main thing is get vaccinated.
Thank you so much for this very thorough answer. The next question I would like to ask here on behalf of Jenny Thailing and some other audience, or in the audience, and they're concerned about what we are what we can do to help with the poverty-stricken population in developing countries and the social equity issues. And so Jenny here asking Dr. Rosenberg, in recent months, there have been many reports of wealthier nations hoarding the Moderna vaccine for their own use. If this is an accurate observation, what should Moderna and those nations be doing in order that the distribution is more equitably, conducted to less privileged nations? What would you say to this issue?
Well, I would say that that the questioner is correct in saying that there's a problem and there's been a problem. I think it's beginning to get addressed, but it's clear that the developed world, the wealthy nations of the world, have bought up all the vaccines. So the first batches, huge batches of vaccine, Moderna vaccine, were bought almost exclusively by the US government. And there were no private sales. It wasn't like insurance companies or private groups. The government paid for the development and paid for hundreds of millions of doses. And so they were able to decide whether to release it elsewhere or not. And the policy was America first, not necessarily the right policy for a global pandemic, but that's what it was. Fortunately now, other organizations focused on the developing world have had an opportunity to purchase vaccine, and it's starting to move. And as supplies increase, it's starting to move. We're not there yet. There is still disparities and inequities, and the pandemic problem won't be solved until everybody can get vaccinated. But the situation is better than it was, and the solution is the amount of vaccination that can be, the amount of vaccine that can be produced, and then moving it to all the places in the world that need it.
Can I then follow up with this question? Can company like Moderna produce vaccine overseas? And
Yes.
what will it take to set up a manufacturing facility to do that? Who can invest in it?
So they can do it, and they have done it, and they can license their technology. And by the way, Moderna, in particular, made the decision during this pandemic that during the time of the pandemic, although they have patents on all this technology that I've described, that they would not defend those patents during the pandemic if someone else wanted to use that technology to produce vaccine. That likely will change once there are sufficient supplies and the pandemic is over, but there aren't barriers to foreign production, and they have collaborated and provided know-how, and there are sites outside of the United States now manufacturing these vaccines. And I think that that's true not only of Moderna, but the other major vaccine producers.
And there's another question from Professor Meyer. He asked, what is the trajectory for the next 18 and 14 months? How long will the immune response to the current Moderna vaccine last? How soon will COVID variants require reformulated vaccine?
Well, if I were able to answer those questions in a definitive way, I would have much more insight, I think, than anyone else on the planet. We can't know that. We just don't know. There have been a number of surprises, of curves in the road during this pandemic. It's impossible to predict whether our race to vaccinate will quash the emergence of important mutants. We can't get data on durability of response At 6 months, you can't get data about 2 years. I mentioned that earlier. It's just not possible. The encouraging things are that that protection does not depend only on the levels of neutralizing antibody that you have in circulation. So people get very concerned that these levels of antibodies start to fall over time. That's a quite natural response. But the body has memory cells that can make the same neutralizing antibodies as soon as they see that virus re-enter. So we can mount a very large response, let's say a year later or 2 years later, and this is true of many vaccines, even though the levels of antibody that we have in the circulation might be low. In addition, although we know that the neutralizing antibodies are sufficient to protect us, we also have a whole other arm of the immune system called T-cell immunity, and that typically gets activated for viruses. It's a little harder to measure and quantify, but we know that there are T-cell responses as well. So it's possible that we'll have to boost at a year or after several years, but we may get a very durable response as well. We just don't know yet. We'll find out because we're monitoring many, many people who've gotten the vaccine.
So I have a curious question myself here. Every year I do take a flu shots.
Yes.
So is it possible, can you foresee that, say, Moderna vaccine later on will be combined with flu vaccine to give out, to people one shot each year, and that's it, to protect against, COVID and other kind of viruses? Is it possible?
Yes, I think it's very possible, and in fact, Moderna and the other companies are thinking about just this kind of thing to get good protection and to get convenience. The flu virus mutates a lot, so there's drift, and as you know, there's some years where we get some information and we guess that this is going to be the dominant strain of flu that will cause problems around the world, and vaccine is made. And there are years when it's not a great match for the virus that actually takes over. One thing about these mRNA vaccines is that we can respond very quickly when there's new information, as we saw, within days or a couple of weeks. So I'm feeling better about the possibility to address viruses like flu or even the coronavirus that might mutate and drift away from the original strain.
My question then to you is actually going back to the equity issue, also some practical issue as well. The Biden administration, I think that has done a good job in distributing the virus. So we've been able, the vaccine, and we've been able to vaccine now close to more than 80 million people in this country already. Right. I think the news is saying that we could have vaccinated most people who wanted to be vaccinated by the end of May. So that means that, we might have the herd, immunity by then. But the question is, if this country is safe, well, other countries are not safe. And that means you still cannot open up borders, So that still means that there will be still a lot of barriers to international business, international trade, investment, because you can't travel, you can't, can't have what we used to have. In that sense, that means the impact of COVID still is there, even if you have vaccine your own population in your own country. What would you say? What kind of recommendation you would have for the Biden administration? What should they do to actually help to open up the whole world, speed up, and then let's return to the normal? some kind of.
Well, yeah, well, I agree with your analysis completely that we can't wall ourselves off, and we need to make sure that the world gets vaccinated. So I think what the Biden administration can do is ramp up all of the manufacturing as much as it can, and I believe that it is doing that. And we have to collaborate with the rest of the developed world, with the developing world in particular. There's no one mechanism. You can't pull a switch and get vaccine to everybody. There's in public health the issue of the last mile. How do you get something that last bit to everybody that needs it? These are enormous logistic problems, but we have everything we need. We're blessed by having more than one vaccine that works. This is a great advantage. There are places in the world where refrigeration isn't available, and then vaccines other than Moderna and Pfizer are going to be particularly valuable. So I would say the key word is collaboration, and not stopping just when we get enough vaccine for the United States. By the way, we will have enough vaccine for the United States very shortly. The issue now is to get it out to as many people. And you're right, the ultimate protection is if we can get substantial immunity, maybe even herd immunity for the world.
Okay, thank you for that. One question I'd like to ask before I turn over to Professor Manasserian is that there's some really a lot of people are very interested in knowing or comparing between Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and recently, of course, the AstraZeneca, right? And the Oxford one has attracted a lot of attention because of its problem. So the question is, which, how do they compare? If you have choice, which one should take? I don't know how fair the question is, but please take it as you like.
Sure. Well, most people don't get a choice. In this instance, that's not so bad. There are differences, but I would say that they are rather minor. The main message is, if you have an opportunity, when your turn comes, take the vaccine. All the ones that are approved for emergency use authorization in the United States, all successfully prevent death. They all reduce major illness, meaning hospitalization, substantially. Those are the main things. They have different degrees of protection after that. But for the big things that we worry about for ourselves and in a public health way, there are many ways to get protected. So that would be my answer.
Okay. So, we only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to turn over to Professor Manasserian to see if he has picked up more from the audience to ask you.
One more question that I personally am very much interested in. I want to take this opportunity to ask about your opinion. We all witness a new trend in the world economy, and that's related to our course as well, Xiaohua, to international business. We're talking about vaccine diplomacy. What do you think about vaccine diplomacy in the world?
Well, I think the vaccine is a very effective asset to have. And anybody who's gotten vaccinated remembers who gave them that vaccine. You remember whether you got Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca. You remember that for the rest of your life. So I think if you got your vaccine from China, or you got your vaccine from Russia, or you got your vaccine from the United States, people will remember that that country was there for them in their time of need. I would like to see an additional kind of vaccine diplomacy. This is not the last pandemic. It's not the last epidemic. And the notion that each country should try to do what it needs to do in terms of proactively developing vaccines or developing antivirals, and then stockpiling it for their own population. Why can't we, on an international, on a global level, have a massive collaboration where we say, look, here there are, I'm making this up, 25 deadly viral pathogens in the world lurking somewhere. We know some of these. There's Ebola, there's Lassa, there's Marburg. It's a whole bunch of these. And why not say, look, the United States is going to make either vaccines or antivirals or both to 10 of these. And Europe should make 5, and China 5, and Japan, etc. And we just divide up the group. And then that know-how gets shared with everybody so that every country is protected against that. And part of that, by the way, would be to make vaccine and antivirals for the whole world. That's the kind of vaccine diplomacy that I'd like to see.
Thank you very much. I want to add that as far as I'm informed, Russia's ambassador to the United States got vaccinated, and that's one of the good examples how it works, regardless who invented and where you can get it. Another thing I want to ask your opinion is, will that be accurate to say that cooperative advantages can be utilized in using this vaccine diplomacy? Because we work now on new theory on cooperative advantages, and here is an opportunity for all of us, for the humanity, to utilize each of our advantages in medicine, in other spheres. And I do agree with your point that each country can contribute, and we can take advantage of utilizing those advantages, cooperative advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly that's what happened in the scientific world, right? And scientists in academia and scientists in industry were working together. Government and industry were working in a way that they've never worked before. Rival companies were cooperating together. The kinds of collaboration and cooperation that we've seen during this year, they're truly operative. They involved resources and person power. I think we've had a great demonstration project, and it would behoove us to now use it proactively in many different sectors, not just medical, to help humanity.
I think one thing that the vaccine, this COVID-19 has taught us is that we have to cooperate. What is good for you has to be good for everyone. You can't be good just for yourself and not good for others. And this is a too small global village we're in. And I think it was what Dr. Rosenblatt suggested. I think that's probably the way it has to be done. The vaccine needs to be developed around the world, and we got to help each other. So corporate advantage, every country should develop that. We need to collaborate with each other. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the audience who have joined us today. And this is a tremendously learning opportunity for me, for sure, and I hope for all of you who attended. And I want to thank Professor Rosenblatt for taking time to join us today and share his insights. And there are so many lessons we can take away from him. And there are a lot to learn from you. We're gonna begin to read, read what you wrote in the media, in other places. We want to thank you, and you are one of those heroes that we look up to, heroines, who have developed the vaccine to protect us from this horrible virus, and I call it the invisible war, and I want to thank you personally. I got a Moderna vaccine myself, and you are the hero who helped me. So thank you so much, and thank Professor Manasserian for making today's event possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I guess all of us learned a lot. I personally learned a lot from Professor Rosenblatt, and I honestly hope that we may follow up sometimes in the future and consult with you. And it's a very rare opportunity to learn this from the source, from the very source. So thank you very much, and God bless you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manasserian, Dr. Vias, Dr. Yang. It's a real honor, and I've enjoyed this session very much, and I hope we continue to interact.
And I would love to bring you back in 12 months or, 16 months to talk about at that stage, what Moderna is doing at that time. Yeah. And so I want to thank my colleague, John Benasevich, who helped us with the setting up thing today. And Regina, who's not here, but also helped us. And my colleague, Professor Richard Johnson, who doesn't show here, but he's also in the audience, who supported us, and Professor Vias for supporting us. So thank you, and good night, and please stay tuned. There will be another event CBSI is hosting on April 14th on Africa, China, and US triangle relationship. So please stay tuned and join us then. And thank you again, everyone.